brutal, giant, ruthless, and like a meteor from outer space heading our way here in the United States.
追踪中国汽车数十年的 Michael Dunne 说，中国车企正像一颗流星冲向全球，但低价只是表面，真正让传统车企不安的是中国把制造、软件和商业化接在了一起。
But it hasn't really hit yet. We're gonna talk about this. It's a meteor that seems to be coming, but has not made landfall in the United States just yet. But before we get to the U.S. part of it, giant, brutal, those are interesting words to use. Do you just mean in the context of the competition is brutal, or what do you mean by brutal?
Yeah, so there's something among China hands known as the China's killer playbook. And we've seen China apply this to industry after industry over decades now. Starting when I first went to China in the 1980s, it was buttons. Yeah, the buttons you wear on your shirt. China said, we are going to be the world dominator when it comes to manufacturing buttons. They concentrated massive capacity inside their country. It was brutal competition there, and then they exported globally. They're the king of buttons, and they still are. And since then, we've seen that same playbook happen in steel, in solar panels, in drones today, and now it's happening in cars. So much so that China has enough capacity today to supply half the world's demand for cars. And it's not out of the question that one day China could be capable of producing all the cars for everybody in the world. So they amass massive capacity at home, brutal price wars at home, which incentivizes companies to export like crazy all over the place. And that's exactly what we're seeing with cars today in China.
I want to talk about the exports in a second, but you mentioned the capacity that they have right now. So I'm more familiar with how it works in solar and batteries. And there, oftentimes what you see is, okay, you have dozens and dozens of new manufacturers who spin up in China. They're often supported either at the federal level or at the provincial level. There is this brutal competition, as you described. And so part of what ends up happening as a result of that in solar and in batteries is that they have a lot of excess manufacturing capacity, and a lot of that capacity is kind of idle. So yeah, maybe they have the capacity to meet half of the world's needs, but average utilization of a manufacturing facility is 50% or something like that. Is it similar in the car world?
Absolutely identical story. So to put some numbers to it, this year China has capacity to build about 55 million cars. Their domestic demand is 25 million. They'll export another 10 million. That leaves 15 to 20 million in excess capacity idle looking for new markets. So it's precisely to describe it. It's just that today it's the automotive turn. And importantly, a lot of people outside of China think, oh, well, yeah, that's EVs. No, this is across the board. EVs, PHEVs, hybrids, gasoline, they have overcapacity in every powertrain. And we're seeing exports last year, half of them were EVs, half of them were gasoline-powered vehicles.
Of that capacity in China, how much is EV versus ICE vehicle?
It's about 50-50 at this point. ICE is drawing down, plants are being closed and maybe converted to EVs, but it's probably about 50-50 at this juncture.
Okay, so they're exporting in roughly equal measure to what they are producing. About half and half. Where are the exports going, mostly?
Yeah, so where they're not going may be the easier question to answer. If you imagine a map of the world, and we have this in our present corporate presentations, every country I've visited in the last 24 months, in every time zone, has Chinese cars entering them now, with one exception, the United States. So Mexico, Europe, South Africa, Thailand, Middle East, Africa, they're going everywhere all at once. Put some numbers to it. In 2020, China exported 1 million cars worldwide. This year, they're on track to export 12 million cars. 12 million. That's putting the hurt on legacy automakers in all these markets worldwide. We're living on an island here in the United States. We haven't felt it yet. So it's hard for us to imagine the immense capability of the Chinese automakers and how they're just taking other markets by storm.
But before we do that, who are the big players these days? Who are the? This is one other thing I will point out, by the way, about the solar industry as it developed, is that the names of the Chinese companies who were the biggest solar panel manufacturers a decade ago are not the names of who are the biggest solar manufacturers today. There was a ton of turnover, even at the very top. You know, in the 2010s, it was Suntech. Suntech doesn't really exist anymore. It was Yingli.
Right.
It was all these other companies, and now it's Longi and a bunch of others. So, like, do you see the same kind of turnover, or are we going to have more persistent brands in the vehicle world because it's more of a consumer product and like they're trying to build up the brand?
All right. So one of the crazy things, you probably saw this in solar too, so there are dozens and dozens of Chinese car makers. At last count, there's more than 60. There are more than 100 individual brands. So you go, wait a second, how can that be? We have the Detroit 3, we have a handful in Japan. How come they have so many? Well, that's a whole nother story about how state capitalism works. But if we want to distill it down into its essential ingredients, think of two categories of players, of leaders in the industry. One would be the legacy automakers, the companies that have been around for at least 10 years, probably 20. And top of the list there is your BYD, which also happens to be a major battery manufacturer. Then you have Geely, which is the owner today of the Volvo brand and the Polestar brand and the Lotus brand. And then after that, you have a big state enterprise called Shanghai Automotive, which is exporting products under the MG brand, the iconic British brand they acquired several years ago. These are your legacy automakers. They're larger. They build several million cars a year, and they're good and strong in their own right. And then you have a second category, a brand new category, and think of these as like the Teslas of China. They've just been born in the last decade. Some of them are only 5 years old, and they've been founded by billionaires who made their fortunes originally in software, in the tech industry inside China. Now they're saying, oh, look what Tesla's doing to the auto industry globally as a massive disruptor. Will be the Teslas of China. So you have names like Xiaomi, Xpeng, Leap Motor, who else? NIO's in the mix there. And, those are the main players in this sort of new Teslas of China category.
In terms of differentiation amongst them, I mean, we have multiple automakers, a smaller number. We have multiple automakers in the US and those who import into the US. And there's all the standard versions of differentiation. The product is different. Cars are different from each other. What do you see as like the biggest differences amongst the major players, at least in China? Are they approaching the market with different strategies or different types of products, or are they all pretty similar and they're just cutthroat with each other?
I think of them as, you don't ever see that picture of like a massive schools of fish all mixed together, shapes, sizes, colors, going in different directions. That's China's auto industry. So you have niche players, you have mass scale players, you have electric only specialists, you have companies that will produce every powertrain. But if I were going to try to distill it down, you have really old generation or your legacy automakers who are dependent on scale and low cost. That's your BYDs and Geelys and SAICs. Then you have this new generation that's all about software and software-defined vehicles and over-the-air updates and digital interfaces. So they're focused on making the car a gadget, the ultimate urban device. And so you have kind of, if we put it in American terms, you have Ford, GM, and Chrysler on the one hand, and you have Tesla, Rivian, Lucid on the other. That's the biggest distinction relevant to us in our discussion today.
You mentioned cost. Where are we in terms of cost? What are they charging in China, and then what are they charging for exported vehicles? And
this is where
I guess predominantly on electric vehicles. I know there's differences, but like let's talk about the EVs.
Okay, because it's the future. I mean, electrics were 5% of the Chinese market in 2020. They're half now, so they're really on the ascendancy. Cost. This is where the meteor starts to look really scary. You can build an electric car in China and they do, and sell it for under $10,000. In terms of comparison to Europe and the United States, they're 30 to 40% less expensive. And so as you look around the world, you say, if you're going to build an electric vehicle, where should you build it? There's only one answer, and that's China. And Tesla's proof of concept of that. Half of Tesla's global production is centered in China. That's not by mistake. Elon looked around the world. Where can I be most competitive? China is the place to manufacture at scale and at low cost electric vehicles.
Is $10,000 the price or the cost?
The cost. No, they'll start with the BYD goal at about $8,500. Their cost per unit is probably around $7,000 in that price point. Their margins are super thin, Shane, super thin compared to anywhere else in the world. So this is the double-edged sort of knife edge of what's happening in China. You have scale, you have competitiveness, you have great products at low cost, but your margins are ultra thin. They're not making much money, but they're selling like crazy.
So before we get to the US then, in the rest of the world, these Chinese cars are flooding the market. Are we seeing automakers outside of the US start to feel the pain meaningfully? Like, are we going to see a wave of failures of automakers of basically everybody who's not Chinese and not US based, or at least not importing enough into the US for it to make up the difference?
We're already seeing it in Europe for sure. Volkswagen's come out and said between now and 2030, they'll lay off 50,000 people. This is unprecedented. They're closing plants for the first time since World War II. And the Germans are not alone. Honda, also for the first time since the 1950s, announced a loss last year. Why? They're getting beaten down in traditional markets like Thailand, Indonesia, Australia, the UK, across Europe. Virtually every legacy automaker is taking it on the chin. And the most vulnerable right now, there's two of them. One is Nissan, and the other is Stellantis, the group that owns, Fiat and Maserati and Jeep and Chrysler brands. Those two are the most vulnerable. So what will happen is either they'll joint venture with the Chinese and eventually be taken over by them, or the Chinese will just buy their brands outright. I mean, we're not talking about something that might happen 3 to 5 years from now. It's happening right now in Europe. Enormous pressure on the existing automakers just to stay alive.
Let's talk about autonomy for a second. Where does autonomy fit into the mix in China? Obviously in the US, we have Waymo, we have the Tesla Robotaxi coming. There are others like Zoox who are starting to arrive in some cities. Is China seem ahead, behind? Is it part of the export strategy, or is it not? Like, where does autonomy fit?
Great arena here, autonomy. So it is a two-horse race between the United States and China. The edge to China comes on the regulatory front. Here's a comparison. When I talk to regulators in China, their job, as they see it, their mission is to smooth the way to commercial ramp of autonomous in China and other markets worldwide. Make it as easy as possible, facilitate, make it go faster. What do you need to make it happen? Whereas here in the United States, the regulators are much more cautious. How do we make sure things don't go wrong? How do we make sure it's safe? So in that respect, the US leads in technological innovation, but China, once again, is quicker when it comes to commercialization. Not only inside China, but we're seeing the Chinese autonomous vehicle makers move into the Middle East and in the UK and Germany now, moving quicker to market than their US counterparts. And this is where we're at risk. We might be the inventors, but China commercializes more quickly, and that's a problem for us.
The other thing that I think is interesting is what's happening in the US with autonomy is you can't today. I mean, Tesla is the closest to this with FSD, but generally speaking, you're not buying an actual self-driving vehicle, FSD's name notwithstanding. You can't buy a Waymo operated Jaguar, right? And if you did, it would be very expensive because of the sensor suite and so on. But because Chinese vehicles are starting at such a low price point in the first place, I imagine you might sooner see consumer available fully autonomous vehicles in China than we see in the US. Again, Tesla FSD notwithstanding.
Definitely a company like XPeng, which does everything it can to mimic whatever Tesla's doing. They are into robotics, and they're very optimistic that their goal, their mission, is to turn a lot of private buyers into purchasers of their vehicles, which have advanced autonomous features. So if that breaks out in China, it's the largest market in the world, and just as we've seen extremely quick adoption of EVs, the Chinese consumer, unlike I grew up in Detroit, car culture, love driving, acceleration, handling, braking, performance. For the Chinese, the car is something different. Number one, it's a projection of social status. And number two, it's a gadget. You get in your car, you're not going to have a whole lot of fun driving around Beijing or Shanghai because the traffic's unbelievable. It's more like, what can I experience inside my car? And if I don't have to drive, all the better. So my bet would be we'd see earlier, quicker, faster AV adoption, just as we've seen EV adoption in China.
What's the charging infrastructure like in China, particularly in urban areas? I wonder. There's such dense urban cities, Beijing and Shanghai and things like that. How do people charge?
You know what? It's so good that people don't even think about it anymore. There's charging, for example, Tesla superchargers. You know how in the United States there's more or less planted in between cities. When you take a road trip between San Diego here and LA, I know where the supercharger stations are. In China, they put the supercharger stations inside the cities so that people on their way to work can stop and charge up. But there are dozens of other providers of charging services inside the city, outside the city, so that many owners of EVs don't have to worry about charging at home. They can charge at the office, they can charge at the mall, they can charge on their way to work, on their way home. Very convenient in most major metropolitan areas across China. That's one of their secret superpowers in this rapid adoption of EVs.
先给流星这个比喻降一点温。中国汽车产能很大，价格战也很激烈。但产能大不等于每家企业都能赚钱，更不代表所有品牌都会留下来。Dunne在原片中谈到的闲置产能、薄利润和企业淘汰，恰好说明这场竞争有明显代价。中国汽车今天的优势是在这种高压环境里形成了更快的筛选和迭代速度。这种速度首先来自产业链离得足够近，电池、电机、电子零部件、软件团队、整车工厂和大规模市场集中在同一套产业网络里。一个设计变化能够较快进入样车和生产线，再接受用户反馈。成本下降只是结果之一，更关键的结果是车企可以在较短周期里修改产品，再把新的版本推回市场验证。中国市场还有一个少见的结构，比亚迪、吉利、上汽这些拥有制造规模的企业与小米、小鹏、蔚来等带着互联网和软件思维的新公司同时竞争。前者熟悉工厂、供应链和成本控制，后者更重视操作系统、智能座舱、无线更新和用户界面。两类企业并没有各走各路，而是在同一个市场里互相逼迫、互相学习。所以外界如果只盯着一辆车卖多少钱，就会漏掉最难复制的部分。便宜的产品可以靠补贴或短期降价做出来，持续推出更好的产品却需要工程团队、供应商、制造现场和真实用户不停交换信息。这种循环一旦转起来，单个品牌可能消失，能力却会留在人才、设备和供应链里。自动驾驶的讨论也说明了这一点。Dunne承认美国在部分技术创新上仍然领先，同时判断中国在商业化方面推进更快。这个判断不能直接当成排名，但他指出一个实际差别：实验室里的技术只有进入道路、车辆和服务网络，才会继续积累数据，暴露问题并降低成本。中国的长处是愿意把新技术放进大规模应用中反复修正。充电基础设施承担的是同样角色。充电桩数量当然重要，更重要的是它是否出现在办公室、商场和通勤路线附近。用户不必围着技术安排生活，电动车才会从少数人的选择变成日常交通工具。原片中对北京、上海等城市的观察不能代表全国，但它让我们看到汽车竞争早已延伸到城市服务和使用环境。中国汽车仍有利润过薄、重复投资、品牌淘汰和海外规则适配等难题。软件与自动驾驶也涉及安全、责任和监管，推进速度不能代替可靠性。承认这些限制并不会削弱中国已经形成的能力，反而能把优势看得更准确。 传统车企真正面对的并非一款价格更低的中国汽车，而是一套能够同时试验制造、软件和服务的产业现场。中国让市场规模既产生销量，也产生反馈，让供应链参与迭代，而不只负责交货，让基础设施进入用户每天的路线，而不只停留在建设数字上。汽车产业最后比的不是谁先做出一个功能，而是谁能把它稳定、快速地变成大量消费者愿意使用的产品。